This place is a little dark. We need to light it up. Hello everyone, and welcome to Gerald's Forge. My name is Alex, and I build terrain for tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons, Gloomhaven and Warhammer, as well as making silly attempts at creating custom miniatures and dioramas. I have been working for some time on this particular build, this ancient, war-grown shrine diorama, using simple materials like XPS insulation foam, common PVA glue, sand and sawdust, as well as various methods and techniques shown by amazing builders and crafters on YouTube. I created a project like this. This will be a series of videos showing various aspects of the project, like greenery in the trees, rocks and water. And this first episode I want to dedicate to the lighting effects, because this particular project has two lanterns that can be switched on and off using the hidden switches, and I want to share with you how I got to this point so far. Hopefully it will give you some inspiration for your own builds and ideas for adventures for your friends at tabletop games. So let's get into it. The process of creation of lighting effects began with figuring out the power source for the LEDs. Electric tea lights were the first obvious choice, as they are both small enough and have a switch mechanism that was crucial for the whole project. I got the cheapest I could find, as they would be broken to pieces anyway, and began disassembling. The plastic part on top that simulates the flame can be easily peeled off, as nothing is actually holding it from the inside. The actual case of the tea light consists of two pieces and can be opened with a small bit of force and leverage applied, revealing a very simple mechanism inside. That includes the flickering LED with a couple of wires coming out of it, a black piece acting as a switch, and a white base holding them together. Now, the pagoda that I built previously to act as a centerpiece of the diorama had a hole bored inside one of its pillars that would allow the wires to go straight from the ground to the inner side of the roof, and then to be connected to the LED, the future lantern at the front. For the wires I got the cheap Christmas lights from the dollar store. They were perfect for this because the wires themselves were thin and flexible enough, and also because they had the non-flickering LEDs, which were exactly what was needed for the lanterns. I've cut the length of the wire from the rest of the decoration, removed the blob of hot glue that was holding the actual LED inside the white tree, and easily pulled it out. After that, I cut the plastic case that was keeping the wires and LED securely together, as that original connection was quite too long, and I needed to create my own length for the lantern that would be hanging down from the roof of the pagoda. After removing the excess, I began to solder the wires to the LED for the required length, which was, well, short enough, just a few millimeters. The result was far from perfect, but that would do for the time being. Before going further, it was important to test the connection and the condition of LED by holding the wires on the other end to the battery from the tea light. And it was a heartwarming success. Returning to pagoda, I began to wonder how to actually put the wires through the pillar easily enough and make them come out at the roof side. That wasn't quite as simple as I first planned it to be, so I took the most direct approach here and cut off the pillar from the building, attached the wires through the hole where the lantern would be added later, and pulled most of the wire's length to the pillar side. I also decided to widen the hole inside the pillar as much as possible, and my trusty old round-shaped miniature sanding file helped me with that just fine. At the next step I had to figure out the actual spot on the ground on top of the tiles where the wires would be going down to. I removed the top piece of diorama. Yeah, that was actually pre-planned a bit, and I tried to build the exterior with having the LED switches hidden inside in mind. With Pagoda in hand, I gauged the exact spot where the whole building would be placed at. Here I also had to try and find a good angle at which the centerpiece would be looking the best to the viewer from the front. While doing that, I noticed the slight crack on the pillar near the spot where it was glued back to the roof, and the overall flimsiness of it. It seemed like the foam inside was slightly torn, so I had to do something to strengthen it. To fill that crack up, I grabbed a bucket of joint compound. That's main purpose in renovations is actual filling of the cracks. Took just a slight bit of it and mixed it together with a quick drying PVA glue for the extra strength. It creates a very thick, rough paste, dries quick enough and still retains some flexibility, even in solid form. Using the toothpick, I applied the mix to the crack and left it to dry. Having decided on the spot where the pillar with the wires would be standing on the tiles, I had it marked and bored through the foam using the same round sanding file and toothpicks. I also needed to create a switch for the lantern. In the original T-Light there is a very simple mechanism that moved one wire to the LED close to the battery in the on setting, while the other wire always had a connection to it. Since I didn't need the flickering LED here, I had to apply my own set of wires to the mechanism, and for that I decided to utilize the green plastic wrapped wire that is used primarily in gardening. It is thin, flexible and easy to work with, so it was the perfect choice. I attached a small piece of the wire to the top part. This would be the one that is constantly connected to the battery. I shaped it in a similar fashion to the original LED's wire. Having another piece of green wire cut and cleaned off, I applied it to the black plastic piece of the mechanism. This would be the switch, the one that connects and disconnects from the battery. Since the top part of the T-Light case was no longer attached and needed, the black switch piece now had nothing that would keep it securely in place, and it could easily fall out. To remedy that, I've cut a small piece of plastic from the top piece. It could act as a holder to the black switch if I glued it to the case. I've cut this piece of plastic in half and used a drop of super glue to attach them to the bottom piece. I positioned them in a way that they held the black switch down from two sides, but still allowed it to move. Using another drop of super glue, I sprinkled it with a bit of baking soda, which created a strong, cement-like bond. And while the mix of joint compound and PVA glue was still uncured, I've put some of that paste to the white holders as well, just for the sake of it. That wasn't really needed, but I felt I would do it anyway and not let the paste go to waste. I had to create a groove inside the top piece of the heel that would conceal and keep the battery compartment, and a switch that would be connected to the lantern. Using the hole that I made previously as a navigational point, I gauged the place where the switch would fit and marked the spot. Using the knife, I carefully carved the round shape of the switch and cut the inner circle part in pieces to make it slightly easier to rip off and dig through the foam. until a sort of crater was created that the switch would fit in good enough. As before, it was crucial to test the connection of the wires to the LED before gluing and securing anything. I simply wrapped the wires together and tried the switch. Worked like a charm. As it would become more difficult to attach later on, I decided that it was time to make the lantern itself. I already had a working LED that gave me light, so I needed a sort of case that would be put on it. As before with things like that, I wanted to make a little bit of a sketch of what I would like to see in the end. It was supposed to be a simple construction of the possibly ancient mix of fantasy and real Asian-themed lantern. I took a few scrap pieces of XPS foam that I had stored from the previous steps of the project and began working on the base and the roof of the lantern. Those had to be square-shaped flat pieces that would be of appropriate size to the rest of the building. I applied some additional elements, like the cube, to the top piece that would serve as the base of the cap. Using the rotary tool, I sanded and shaped the cap of the lantern to apply a curve to it. Using a soft nail file, I gave it some additional edges. There were supposed to be 4 narrow wood planks attached to the angles of the cap. So I grabbed a thin flat piece of XPS foam and cut it in pieces before gluing them to the cap. At that time I decided to add a bit of wood texture to the foam pieces using a sharp pencil. Just some little indents and grooves to make the texture a bit more interesting. Next would be the vertical planks that would connect the bottom and top pieces of the lantern together. From my experience of building the stone lanterns at the ends of the stairs before, I knew such little pieces of foam would be too flimsy for it, so I took the toothpicks instead. Using the rotary tool, I gave them a more square-shaped form. This is a good time as any to use the safety glasses, as those wood pieces do tend to fly around. Be careful if you are attempting to do something like that. Or simply find the square-shaped toothpicks ready to go. Having them cut in appropriate length, I applied the pieces of toothpicks to the bottom of the lantern using quick-drying PVA glue. While that was drying, I thought of a way to dull the light beam from the LED a bit, without actually obscuring it. Baking paper quickly came to mind. It's the paper you would normally use in the oven. It has a nice texture, a fitting color, and while being thin enough, it softens and spreads light through. I've cut 4 little pieces of it and applied them to the bottom part of the lantern, securing them with PVA glue to the toothpicks. Leaving that to dry, I used the sharp tip of the rotary tool to create 4 small grooves at the bottom side of the lantern's cap. Those would be the spots where the tips of toothpicks would fit in. I also drilled the center of the cap for the LED to fit through. After both parts of the lantern were glued, I gave the bottom side a slight angled shape using a soft nail file. Finally, to add some interest to the piece, I added 4 thin stripes of foam to the lower side, which would visually balance the top and bottom parts of the lantern in the end. I wanted to create a lantern post by the road at the bottom of the stairs, which would add to the atmosphere of a lone path going through the lush green forest. It would need to thematically match the pillars of the building at the top of the stairs, but first of all I had to decide on the height of the post. I simply used the miniature to gauge size, figuring that the post would be slightly bigger than the pillars, and began cutting a piece of XPS foam to create a brick of needed dimensions. The lantern post is supposed to be made out of a wood log, so I used the nail file to sand the square edges of the piece, to give it a more round shape with a little bit of curve, thicker closer to the middle. Remember to use vacuum cleaner to gather all that foam dust afterwards, and wear a mask if you are sanding in large quantities. After rounding up the edges, I once again checked how appropriate the size of the post would be to the rest of the terrain, and I was fairly satisfied. Now, when the post was starting to gain form, I had to give it a bit of a texture, since it should look like it's made of actual wood. This is easily done by sliding the wire brush along the surface of the piece, imitating the indents and grain of the wood texture. I also used a sharp pencil to create more defined grooves and knot spots, giving the log a more interesting look. This is the same technique I used when making the pagoda's pillars. I wanted the lantern post to have the stone base similar to the ones I created for the pillars. I took the leftover piece of XPS foam remaining from the other project and cut a square brick out of it. Using the nail file, I rounded it up in the same fashion as the post just before. Since it would be stone, I gave it a rock texture using the common method of aluminum foil ball. After that, with a sharp pencil I began drawing small rocks at its surface. No defined pattern needed here. The more random it is, the better will be the look in the end. I really liked how on the lower part of the pillars the vertical wooden planks came out to be, and since I wanted the post to be in the same theme, I decided to add them here as well. I grabbed another leftover piece of XPS foam that already had a wood texture on it, trimmed it to the width that would be fitting, and then cut the needed length of the future planks. With a nail file I made a slight indent at the bottom of the post to make room for the thickness of the planks, just enough to not let them stand out too much. Having that spot covered with PVA glue, I carefully attached the planks to the post. Hot glue would definitely be quicker to cure here, but it would surely leave a mess with excess and wisps all over. PVA glue also allows for some movement of tiny pieces like that, giving you a chance to correct any mistakes in the process. After the planks were attached, I gave it another look with a stone base close by, and figured that now the base would be quite small compared to the post, and would lose its definition when assembled. So I simply made another base slightly bigger, using all the same techniques. The top of the planks needed a metal band to keep them together. A thin stripe of XPS foam would do just fine, so I measured the length needed to cover the whole circle and used hot glue here to attach one of the ends first, then applied it all around the post. The second layer of metal band would add to the depth of the piece and make it look more interesting. I used a drop of hot glue to attach an end of the second band and then applied PVA glue instead to the rest of the length for a stronger bond. Another drop of hot glue at the other end would hold the band securely while PVA was drying. The process of applying the wooden planks made some of that wooden texture on them, as well as on the post itself from my fingers holding it, less defined. I used sharp pencil to draw a few deeper grooves on the foam, making sure that the texture can still be clearly seen. A few odd imperfections here and there can only make any piece of terrain more interesting. This would pay off after the paint job later on. Metal bands would look too plain and clean if they were left as is, so I made sure they had a few dents and cracks visible all around. Pushing the wire brush to create a more pointy texture also helps to create a more defined, worn metal look. Alright, this is it for the first episode. In the future videos I will show how I built the lantern post and painted it and dealt with getting the wires all the way through to the base of the diorama itself. I will also be showing how I built the plant life, the cherry blossom tree itself, as well as adding some embellishing details to the whole piece. I will be talking about dealing with the mistakes and how I had to redo some stuff along the way. If you enjoyed this first episode of building the foundations and basics for the lighting effects, it gave you some ideas to build your own project or simply provided a spark of inspiration for your adventuring party, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because it will help it grow by a large amount. And I'll see you in the next episode.